we're here to cover Viserai today, a hero that has been relatively unexplored ever since Rosetta Thorn rotated for good reason, right? Rosetta Thorn was an incredibly powerful weapon. I don't really see him in conversations outside of, being thrown as an afterthought in the bottom of a tier list, usually talking about the OTK style list. And so I kind of did some thinking, and I kind of came to the conclusion that I think that Viserai's matchup spread into the current ProQuest season meta is actually really good, because at least for week 1, you were favored into Dromai while she was still legal. But you're also good into Kano, you're good into Prism, you're good into the dual hand warriors for a couple reasons. The first is that being a split damage hero, they have to bring Arcane Barrier, which means that most of the time Hatchet Story and Kasai are both giving up Brayforge into you, which is really powerful as just like a normal mid-range deck that's trying to play good numbers. Kasai doesn't have access to blues, so a lot of times she can't even pay for the rune chance efficiently. And with both of those decks, they are decks that need the game to go long, but you're also a pretty good grindy hero. But the main difference is that you also have these incredible pop-off turns, where as early as turn 2, you can just throw out 30 damage split in 2 ways. And you also have really good powerful setups into them, where you can just block with a few cards, make rune chance, arsenal a power card, and pass to them with 4 cards in their hand. They don't get to block with Dynamo, so their Dynamo cycle value is off. And a lot of the times I have trouble converting 4 cards into pure offensive numbers that are not bad, right? Specifically, the dual-handed versions that are popular right now are not known for keeping 4 cards, right? They want to play a mid-range game with you. So if you just block out, play or read the runes, arsenal and pass, and get ready to throw 30 damage at them and just put them on their 4-card hand, a lot of times they're not really doing anything that you're super worried about. So you kind of get the idea, right? It felt like your matchup spread was good. Your slow matchups were fine too. Like if you play into Victor, Bravo's a little bit dicier, but Bravo's not popular. So it just seemed like you were in the clear, right? The only thing that was a problem was Katsu, in my opinion. Azalea is really tough. KO is a little bit of an anomaly. It feels like a coin flip matchup, and you do have some tech. You also do have some fundamental strengths into KO, but also they just have the abilities to high roll you. And they also have access to Flesh Bag, which is, a lot stronger than the equipment that you're presenting. But also going into week 2 with Dromai gone, I would expect warrior representation to be higher, also as a bit of an answer to KO. In which case, I still feel like he's in the same spot, which is actually a really good rogue deck. I played it at my ProQuest last weekend, and I went 4-2, bubbled out because I lost in the wrong rounds, like rounds 2 and 5. But we beat warriors, we beat Victor, we beat Dromai, and we lost to a KO, but that was a pretty bad high roll on the KO's part. I really felt like there was no agency I had that game, and the game was still relatively close. And I lost to a Hatchet Story by a razor thin margin, as in I was off by 1 point of damage. They had to blind crown to find a blue instead of a yellow to present lethal. If they didn't do that, I had lethal because I had a Vexing Mouse and they were at 1. So, it is what it is, right? But the point is that the deck felt very powerful. It felt like I had the ability to win every single matchup I played. When I looked at the top 8 spread for what we had, I felt like if I found a way to bubble in instead of bubble out, I would have had a very clean run, I think. Although there was a Katsu, which is a problem. So we can get into that in a bit. But the point is, I think it's pretty strong. You run Reaping Blade, which of course is Rosetta, but 1 point less. So it is worse, right? It's not split. It makes creepers harder to keep around. The upside that you get with Reaping Blade, though, is the fact that now you can 1-card 4 by just pitching a blue to Grasp with the Arcanite and swinging Reaping Blade. You didn't have access to this line, obviously, with Rosetta Thorn, because it was 2 and 1. And so you have a lot more opportunities now, especially in this more mid-range style meta, where you can actually block with 3 cards or 2 cards, just 1-card 4 arsenal setup. Like we talked about earlier in a warrior, really cool thing with that line of play in a warrior is that if you block with 2 cards and then do the Grasp Reaping Blade play, what's interesting is that because their deck is all 3 blocks, they actually don't have a way to use Dynamo in this equation, right? If it was just 4 physical, they would just put a 3 block and Dynamo in front. But the fact that Dynamo has no part in this equation, right, because of the 1 arcane, it just normally means you're leaking 1 and their Dynamo is not being used that turn, which is the most incredible tempo win for you, right? But this is still an aggro to mid-range style deck with a bit of combo potential. So let's go into our equipment to start us out here. We have a lot of equipment. We have 10 equipment in total. This is probably too much and it constrains a lot of your sideboard, but there's kind of a need for all of these. So starting with our chess pieces, we have Aether Ironweave for aggro matchups. This is because this just lets you block early with it and then pop it off for 2 resources. First chance you get when you want to explode and try to close the game out ASAP, right? We have Tunic for the longer matchups. This is for when you think you're going to be getting more than 2 resources out, and just having that Tunic just to clean up a few of your lines, being 1 resource short, just gives you a lot of flexibility. We have Dyadic. This is for matchups into aggro where we want to block a lot more often, and we actually want to use that Temper too. And then also into Kano with the combination of Vexing Quill Hand to give us a really clean AB3. For headpieces, we have Tiara. This is for Kano. This lets you basically convert your rune chants into Spell Void 1. Works really well with creepers plus something like Read or Revel, where in response to the combo at some portion of the game, you can just like flash in 4 rune chants, if not more, and just completely wipe out Nether Wildfire, depending on the sequencing of what happens on that turn. And if you're kind of clever with your triggers, what you can do is that you can always have your Viserai trigger that makes a rune chant resolve first before the rune chant is breaking. So for instance, you play like non-attack attack action and you have like a rune chant left over from the last turn. What you do is that you have the Viserai trigger happen before the rune chant that's there currently explodes. The reason why is because if they decide to combo off in response, you can Amethyst Tiara the rune chant that's waiting there. But if they decide to let the Viserai resolve and then have the rune chant pop, you still have your rune chant created. So it sounds complicated. You're basically sequencing it, so you always have 1 rune chant on the battlefield, and that just always lets you have Spell Void 1 into Kano. Is this overkill? Maybe, but I think if you have any Kanos in your area, it's a 1-card, sideboard that I think would definitely help your matchup a lot, right? So it's probably worth including. For other headpieces, we have Balance. This is for decks that draw cards, right? So specifically Dash.io, but more importantly Brute, right? And then for decks that don't draw multiples of cards in a single turn, or decks that present Arsenal Disruption, so Assassin, Guardian, things like that, you can run Crown of Providence. Crown of Providence is really nice because it lets you fix your hands, right? Because it's Runeblade. You need attacks and non-attacks in your hands, so it lets you filter yourself out of some pretty bad situations. For arms, we only have Grasp here that comes into every single matchup except for Vexing Cool Hand that we just bring in for Kano. And then for our weapon, we've already covered it. We're doing Reaping Blade. That's all we're on. And then for boots, we're only on Spellbound Creepers. No reason to play anything else. This card's really fantastic. There's much better content out there if you want to learn how to effectively use this equipment, but you will get lines sometimes in your games where this thing will absolutely bail you out. However, there's also a lot of instances where you're never presented with that opportunity, and it's just correct just to use it as basically Iron Rot boots and just block with them and forget about them. So there are blocking equipment that also has the ability to let you do some really sick plays, right? Like double revel, things like that. And that stuff does come up. It came up in my ProQuest where I did Grasp into Swarming Gloomveil, so 3 go again. And then I played a Revel, held priority, flashed in the second Revel with the Spellbound Creepers, so that even though Revel was technically like the first non-attack I played that turn, both of them resolved properly. I end up with like 10 rune chants. It's really sick, right? So you do get lines where you need Spellbound Creepers and you just have to pull the trigger on it. So fantastic equipment. Lets you regain action points as well, or stack multiples of them, which is also nice for a deck that mainly needs Mauvrion Skies to enable Go again. If you look at our main deck here, we have a 56 core, in my opinion. This is just stuff I'm probably going to bring into most matchups. You do kind of flex around a little bit, depending on how much of the sideboard you're bringing in. This is more of a hybrid style list where I'm looking for something close to Dash Inventor Extraordinaire, where you have this kind of aggro mid-range style main board, but then into grindier matchups that have either the ability to fatigue you or you can exploit pretty easily by bringing in a setup package. We have some rune chant stacking effects, right? So specifically Read the Runes, Runeblood Incantation, and then our payoff for these is going to be Ninth Blade of the Blood Oath. So into slower matchups, things like Guardian, Control Mech, right? Things like Teklevasen. Your game plan is mostly just going to be siding in these cards, making a bunch of rune chants, going all the way up to maybe like 15 to 20, and then pulling the trigger on the ninth blade, and then dealing, you know, like 30 plus damage in a single turn. Very powerful. But for the main board, we can go through all of our stuff here. We have some cost reduced effects. We have some cost reduced attacks. So that'd be Amplify the Arcanite as well as Rune Flash. These are really good on the back end of your chain, especially if you have played something like a Deathly Duet, pitching a non-attack, or something like a Spellblade Assault, right? With Viserai's trigger, you'll naturally have 3 if you played something like a Mauvrian Skies beforehand, and so these are essentially free attacks, right? This would be a 0 for 6, this is a 0 for 4 with Go Again. When you're able to extend your chains really far, these can be really powerful. Deathly Duet is a fantastic quality of life card. It's good in multiple situations. Sometimes you're able to pitch a red into it. So if you overpitch your red and then your blue, sometimes if they're the 2 different types, you can get both effects on the Deathly Duet where it gets +2 as well as the 2 rune chance. The reason why I really like this card is that it's super flexible. It's good in a lot of different spots. If you're on a Mordred-Tide turn and you're making additional rune chance, then you can pitch a non-attack to it. If you're playing into an aggro deck and you really want to push tempo because you have like red Mauvrian Skies, you can pitch an attack card to it, which then, you know, gives it the +2 and makes it demand multiple things from your opponent. But the main reason why I think it's super nice is that it is actually a good answer to Warmongers. So if you think about it, if your opponent plays Warmongers and you have, let's say, 1 red and a blue, right? You get to send 6, make 2 rune chants in Arsenal, right? It's a 3-card hand to play this over pitching. You still have a card left over to Arsenal. If you can present 8 plus an Arsenal in response to your opponent's do nothing card that they're playing just to hope that they time walk you in some sense, I really don't know what more you could ask for. 9 copies of Mauvrian Skies. This is the main bread and butter of the deck. Your main game plan is like, sometimes you have an expendable card, which is either going to go in your arsenal, it's going to be blocking, or sometimes you can play it. But the main thing you're trying to do is pitch a blue, play a Mauvrian Skies, play one of these like 2-cost attacks, right? So things like Spellblade Assault, Shrill, Deathly Duet, and then swing with your sword after. Really clean curve, very efficient. Mauvrian Skies is also a pseudo on hit because they pretty much always have to block it, especially like with something like Red Mauve. You pretty much always have to block the attack out fully, which is really powerful, especially when you start getting up to things like 7 with Shrill. Mordred-Tide is really how you're going to combo off in this deck. It just makes everything 1 extra rune chant for the turn. Really, really good with things like Spellblade Assault, Deathly Duet. Even something like Grasp the Arcanite, Revel on a Mordred turn is insane. So this is basically the card that'll let you push like that 25 damage threshold. We have Rattlebones to 2 of. This is mostly used for Swarming Gloomveil because if you pitch a blue to it, you can then play the Swarming Gloomveil. It will get Go Again retroactively because you'll make your rune chant, and then with the 1 left floating, you can swing Reaping Blade. On a 2-card hand, that's a 2-card 7. If you just keep a blue in the Rattlebones, if you have the Swarming in Arsenal, but this also just lets you bank multiple action points sometimes. It can really extend some powerful combo turns. Really good card. We're down to 2 of them because you used to run 3 with Scaletta because you would just break Quill Hand, activate Scaletta, and you'd have a free Rattlebones. We're not a broken deck anymore. We're tier 2 gaming, right? So I don't see the reason to run 3 copies. Having too many of these is clunky. It's not the greatest Arsenal target. Revel is probably the most broken card in the deck, in my opinion, having a 0 for 5 if you include Viserai's trigger. A 0 for 5 Arcane is nuts, right? The fact that even outside of Viserai, like Briar would play this, right? Because it was a 0 for 4 Arcane. So strong. Something like this, you know, playing into Amplify immediately after, Rune Flash, insane, right? Just the rune chants go so far in this deck. Not only are they hard evasive damage for your opponent to deal with, but they also enable some crazy stuff, especially with like Ninth Blade. Not that you always would run this, but you know, some math to know is that Mordred-Tide plus Revel, assuming that you played something beforehand, which you would have to be able to meet Revel's clause, you would have 2 rune chants floating. That puts you up to 9 rune chants, so you can just play a Ninth Blade for free and have a 0 for 9. Nuts. Revel is like the main reason to play this deck. Already covered Rune Flash. Shrill is like your best value attack card, right? If you play like Mauvrian Skies, play this, Viserai will trigger retroactively, give you the +2 on the Shrill, so having just a 2 for 7 with Go Again on hit makes some extra rune chance into your blade immediately after. Just chef's kiss. Sonata is worse now that we don't have Scaletta, but it's still fine because if it hits, basically it refunds you a card, but it also deals 1 arcane, and then it also enables Viserai for the rest of the turn. So it's basically like a 0 card 2, if that makes sense. Like you just refund the card assuming you get lucky, and then it's worth 2 damage for the turn, 2 arcane. Obviously you can try to high roll into a little bit more if you want. If you have extra blues, it converts your larger hands well. So for instance, like if you're putting blocks at a turn and you draw Sonata with a bunch of blues, like you can actually still sculpt a pretty powerful turn. But you know, it is a little bit weaker now that there's nothing to cost reduce it, so it's less splashy now. It's more just like a little bit of variance out of the deck that sometimes can get you a power turn and sometimes it bricks. Spellblade Assault, clean, right? Honestly, would rather have 3 extra copies of Red Deathly Duet, but this is also pretty nice as well. Swarming Gloomveil is probably like the other main powerhouse in the deck, right? Just a 0 for 4 if you made 2 rune chance. So for instance, if you play Mordred Tide, play Swarming, you're instantly getting that +1 and the Go Again, you're getting the 2 modes. You can crack all 3 modes. Sometimes it's actually pretty powerful late game when your opponent actually needs to fully block it out so they don't die immediately after, right? If you hit them late game and like, let's say they're like sub 5 health and you get that last trigger through and you just play Revel, your opponent's just dead on the spot. Become the Arknight is a really good tutor, but you should also just view it as Titanium Bauble because it is card negative to play it, discarding another card to go tutor something. If you're stuck with like a 5-card hand, or there's like a good line and your opponent's low enough and you're doing like a huge pivot that just like being card negative to go get your like copy of Revel for the turn is like good enough, or like Red Shrill, something like that, just to fix the hand or turn into a power turn, that can be okay, but you should just view it like it's Titanium Bauble. Find ways to pitch with it or block with it. I would not actively go out of my way to find ways to play it. It's just too bad on the value exchange, but it is there, right? We're happy to have this kind of effect. Lead the Charge was actually already always good in this deck. This is not Prism tech, but it naturally makes you pretty good into Prism because Lead the Charge is just another copy of Blue Mauvrion Skies without the on-hit thing. Viserai says that if you put a Rune Blade card after a non-attack, you make the rune chant. So if you start your turn with Lead the Charge, it functions exactly the same. But yes, this is also good in Prism. We have Looming Doom. This is here to round out our blue non-attack ratios. If you have an Arknight shard, you could try swapping out one of the Looming Dooms for it. Or, you know, this can be Tome of the Arknight. It could be blue Spellblade Assault, but the problem is like you want your ratio to be pretty clean. And with us sideboarding in, it's a little bit tricky, right? Some of the sideboard cards are non-attacks, some of them are attacks. The ratio is going to be a little bit weird, so if you like having more attacks in deck, then you could just swap these out for like blue Spellblade Assault. However, having these in deck means that your stacking sideboard naturally has a little bit more reach because of the Looming Doom, so you actually have like a secondary game plan that's actually really good into a few of the slower heroes that may also present like a fatigue problem. The other thing too is being on Reaping Blade, you're less concerned about always making sure you're doing non-attack attack with Go Again every single turn for Rosetta Thorn. The fact that this deck can function properly with just like blocking out and just sending 4 by just pitching a blue to these 2 things means that I'm less concerned about having like a pure mathematic ratio. The only downside, right, is Sonata potentially being a little bit less consistent. So we're on these because they're blue block 3 non-attacks for our ratio, but they're also pretty good into the slower matchups, and you do sometimes find an excuse to play them off of creepers if you play something like a Deathly Duet or Spellblade Assault. If you don't know how that works, I'll link a video somewhere. Vexing Malice, good card. Just randomly will win you the game, right? If your opponent never goes to 3 and they're on AB1, it doesn't matter if they're trying to block you out, they're just dead. This card feels like the equivalent of running Reckless Swing, but you have 3 copies and they block 3. When we go into our inventory, we have a couple things. We have our stacking sideboard. This is going to be into the slower matchups where the way you win, specifically with Incantation, Read the Runes, and Ninth Blade, is to stack up a bunch of rune chants. You kind of have to get a feel for when you think you need to pull the trigger based on the board state. I don't view it as a true OTK sideboard plan compared to old Viserai just because we don't have that kind of reach anymore. So a lot of the times I am comfortable just getting up to 9, so my 9th blade is free. Finding the 9th blade and just turning the corner. Nice thing about that too is it means you only have to take like a few off turns. You don't have to wait too long to do something like that. Runic Reclamation is here as a popper. This is really good in Prism, but we're also running this into KO because what this lets you do is it lets you threaten their agility token. So if they make an agility token either off of something like Cast Bones or just on the end of their turn, something like that with Runner, this is so good into them, right? It also has blocks 3, so if they're not in a position where you need to like threaten one of their auras, then you just simply block with this. I'm not entirely sure if I would want to run this in something like Warrior, but just keep in mind, like with those heavy hitter heroes that make like Mights, Agilities, Vigors, that this actually threatens those tokens. So that's why I'm specifically running into KO, is KO really needs the Agilities for his turns to function well. So being able to present 7 on hit, remove their source of go again, is inherently disruptive. And that feels powerful enough to me. And then we have Sync here, just both into the stacking plan to live long enough and to filter out some attack cards to find the non-attacks and make rune chants. But we do run these into a couple of the aggro mirrors where we're playing a little bit more defensive and we need specifically some D-reacts to answer what they're doing. So let's quickly go through the sideboard plan. I have all these available on the deck list, so feel free to look through all these if you want. But if we look at a couple examples here, like into Assassin, we're running Tunic because the game's going to go a little bit slower, and we're running 62 to pad our deck a little bit. On Incantation, for every single matchup we run Tunic because it's just a really easy 1-card play with the Tunic counter, and also these are slower matchups which coincide with both your reason for playing Tunic and your reason for playing Incantation. Read the Runes is also in here. These are just answers for Warmongers specifically into something like Assassin. Also feel free, this is not a true stacking game plan, but like we're not running Ninth Blade, but if you want to, you could easily run Ninth Blade into Assassin. I just currently don't have the reps to figure out if I want to do that or not, but Assassin does not convert 4-card hands entirely well, so you can do something like that. Another example here would be something like Azalea. We are looking to turn the corner as quickly as possible. So we're running Ironweave. We're basically waiting for her to have 1 turn where she doesn't have true disruption. And then we're just going to try to deal as much damage as possible. Read the Runes is here because it's like actually not a bad answer to Red in the Ledger, right? If she plays a Red in the Ledger and you play to read and pass, like you're doing okay for yourself. Dash.io is an interesting one where we're kind of sending in some extra 3 blocks as well as the Carapace and Sinks. You kind of want to present a little bit of a problem of fatigue for the Dash.io to get them to play a little bit slower, and then you can capitalize on their tempo exchange where they will play a little bit worse in order to set up a more powerful turn, and then you can punish. So it's a very dynamic matchup. Feels a little bit like if you're familiar playing Guardian into Dromai, something like that, where you kind of present fatigue as a problem until they decide to respect it, and then you kind of close the gap based on what they're doing. Something like Dawnblade, we're looking to pop off as quickly as possible. So we have our Sinks in here as well as our Ironweave. The main difference here compared to Dual-Handed Warriors, Dual-Handed Warrior, we're looking to make plays with Read the Runes a little bit more often, where we're going to block with like 2 cards, play a Read, Arsenal, and pass. But we're also using Tunic here because we're expecting the game to go a lot longer and we get a lot more mileage out of it. We're running a split of 2 Sinks and 2 Reads. I think having 3 in both directions is too much. The only consideration is that there may be a problem of fatigue based on how the Dual-Handed Warriors are playing. So if you do feel like you need just a couple extra cards, feel free to throw in that 3rd copy of Read or Sink, or even a copy of Ninth Blade. If we're bringing in the Sinks, I'm also usually opting to cut out the Sonata just because it makes your ratios a little bit too bad, and also this doesn't really function a whole lot into what our game plan is into the Dual-Handed Warriors. If we go into Guardian and the control mech, so like this would be Tree Frog Dash, Teklevasan, you can kind of see more what we're doing with the stacking sideboard, patting a little bit just to be able to have enough gas left in the deck to close the game out once we turn the corner. Here you see we have the Ninth Blades, we have the Reads, we have the Incantations, and a few things there in the sideboard are like some of the more aggro cards plus Sonatas, things like that. Here's your example, Kano. Runeblade Incantation is also really good in this game plan because it helps you with the Tiara, right? Where you just always have access to that rune chant, even when you start your turn. Always having access to that Spell Void 1 is pretty sweet. And then you have things like Creepers for Read the Runes or Revel. If you want to respond to their combo, you can get all the way up to like Spell Void 5, right? With Revel, pretty sick. And of course, your game plan here is just being pretty aggressive. You have a good blue density. You also don't have to feel scared about like holding off on swinging Reaping Blade because you're worried about them trying to combo. Like if you just bank like your rune chant, you're perfectly fine anyway because of Tiara. If we go into KO, we're trying to pop off once again, just play aggressive and tight. We're bringing in our 3 runics, and then also just a 1-of sync to get us up to 60 cards. If we're playing into the other brutes, we're running a read just because they may be on Warmongers. I've seen both Leviat and Rhinar play that card, so it's just a small difference. And then bringing back in the Sonatas, even though we're on the syncs, there's really nothing else in the sideboard that I feel like needs to come in. Runic could come in instead of the Sonata, but once again, Rhinar and Leviat don't really make that many tokens, so you're not really getting any extra value out of Reclamation, unless if they're playing something like the new blue non-attack that makes an agility and a might, but you don't really need that. So I just find Sonata to be a little bit better. You want to play more aggressive into these heroes as well. You really are trying to just slam Rhinar with your 4-card hands most of the time. Not really interested in blocking a whole lot. Same goes for Leviat, because you just need to pressure that flip, because if they don't get the flip, they pretty much have no way to race you. Ninja is a tough one, specifically because of the existence of Warmongers, and Lynx is just cosplaying your deck, but you did it first. Ninja is a tough one because they just have access to Warmongers with no penalty to their deck, and also Lynx is an incredibly effective equipment and just smooths out a lot of their draw variants that you don't have access to. So I think you're inherently a little bit unfavored, but we are running the 1-of read. So if they do Warmongers you, either you have the copy, or you can pick peace and go become and go find your 1-of copy and play it. Hopefully they don't have access. Hopefully they don't play 2. You don't need more than 1 read the runes, in my opinion. And you're running syncs in here just to answer things like Snatch. Also in Defy, they have things like Mounting Anchor, and in Dekatsu, you're using this for things like Whelming in response to attack reactions from them if you really want to stop an on-hit from going through. Just nice to have an extra block from Arsenal as well. Prism, you're bringing in Runics because they kill any aura you want. You don't have to deal with a Spectra anymore because you can just kill the Spectra with your 3-for-7 on-hit. You're playing as aggressive as possible, but you gotta kind of know also when it may be a good call to block something out. Riptide I included in here for some reason. You're just gonna stack this dude. There's nothing he's gonna be able to do, depending on what kind of version of Riptide they're playing. Even a more aggressive version, I doubt would have the ability to present enough damage to stop you from this game plan anyway. So if you're hedging that they're on, like a D-React focus list based on traps, and they are playing like Redline, I think you'll still be fine. So to very quickly talk about our maybe board, there's just 3 cards that are all in contention. Consuming Volition is much better tech into Ninja and KO specifically because of this hybrid plan. We would look to cut things like Sinks maybe, but that makes our Warrior matchup just a little bit worse, and it also makes our Guardian matchup, potentially worse. That's the main problem, right? Is as soon as we start including these cards, we're kind of cutting a bit into what our sideboard is, which is for slower matchups. But once again, if you did look through all of these, it is really only Guardian and Control mech that were actually really hard focused on the sideboard plan. So if you don't have a lot of those in your area, and you have much less Guardians and way more, Ninja, KO, things like that, then you can start looking at things like Consuming Volition or Meet and Greet. These are both really good. Meet and Greet can also just even come in as extra help for your OTK plan, because this lets you keep the 5-card hand with the 15 rune chance. They have literally no way to pay out for all the rune chance, so Meet and Greet is just gonna become a 1-for-4 on that turn with Go again, which can let you play up to multiple attacks, right? So on that big combo pivot turn, you can play something like Ninth Blade into Swarming, into Meet and Greet, into Sword at the end. Just really, really cool stuff, and really just blow the opponent out with that OTK plan. Arcanine Shard is actually really interesting. Because of our plan with Reaping Blade, if you pitch this to Grasp of the Arcanine, swing Reaping Blade, you have a 1-card 5, where 2 of it is Arcane. I actually think that may be one of the strongest 1-card plays in the game currently. Codex would obviously beat it, but Codex requires some setup, and this just plays at any point in the game. I think it may be worth the slot, personally. I think you could cut one of your blue non-attacks for it. I would probably cut one of my Liming Dooms or Lead the Charges, but I think Lead the Charge needs to stay because it's basically, up to your 12 copies of Mauve. So I would maybe look at a Liming Doom if you do have access to this card and you do want it. I mean, you're not blocking with it, and if you're ever forced to block with your 4th card and you would die if you didn't have it, I think you probably lost the game anyway. So I'm not super concerned about the no block on that. If I can find one in time for my ProQuest this weekend, I will probably try to include it. And so yeah, that's the deck. So, an old school Viserai list. We're playing, Rosetta Thorn list, Rosetta Thorn Viserai. And that's the deck. So give it a shot. Let me know what you think. If you have any input things you would change, things that you like about it. But until next time, thank you for watching.